We have special guests with us. I love it. We have special guests. We have a special guest here. He is the research director of the American Economic Liberties Project and the best-selling author of the book Goliath, The 100-Year War Between Monopoly Power and Democracy. Please welcome to the show. It's Matt Stoller. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hey there. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Listen, let me just show people there's a little bit of a controversy over Bernie's role in this stimulus plan. And so I want to just kind of lay out what's been going on Twitter, and then we'll get your feedback. So this is our good friend of the show, Dave. Dave Anthony says the country is toast after this bill. It's completely over. The bipartisan deal, this is Justin Amash. He says the bipartisan deal is a raw deal for the people. It does far too little for those who need the most help while providing hundreds of billions in corporate welfare, actually trillions, massive growing government, inhibiting economic adaptation, and widening the gap between the rich and the poor. So this is the exact wrong thing that we should be doing, we're actually doing, and that thing passed 96-0 in the Senate. That thing that he just described, that is a total giveaway of trillions of dollars, that is going to widen income inequality, cement it forever, total giveaway to the richest 1,000 people in the country. And that passed 96-0. He then said, I urge Congress to reconsider what it's doing. There is a simple way to provide direct assistance to the people, and we can get that done today. Dr. Jill Stein retweeted that and said, so the stimulus is a massive upward wealth redistribution scam with a few half measures for people being crushed. We need a hero to hold it up and make Congress explain why they need $4.3 trillion in corporate welfare to help workers in hospitals. Will you back up your words with action? So now here's Bernie Sanders, the People for Bernie, tweeted out Bernie on the floor. This was Bernie's. It says, Bernie Sanders, now I find that some of my, this is his quote, now I find some of my Republican colleagues are very disinterested. They're very upset that somebody is making $10 to $12 an hour might end up with a paycheck for 4 months more than they received last week. So they're tweeting that out. And then Dave Dayen, the editor of the New American Prospect, said he did this, meaning that speech, he did this to make sure the bill passed. Because the bill wasn't going to pass unless Bernie did this. So the bill passed, and he says, his next sentence is, yeah, the bill, the one with $4.3 trillion for a corporate bailout. Dave Dayen is saying he made sure that bill passed. And I'm like, is that really what he's saying? It seems like Dave Dayen is kind of saying Bernie went along with this for no reason. Well, Megan Day tweeted out, it's confusing, but what's happening here is that Bernie is using the tools available to him to threaten to delay the bill's passage by objecting to the worst part of the bill, which bails out corporations, in order to protect one of the best parts of it, which bails out the people. So Bernie is sticking up. See, there's the thing Bernie Sanders tweeted out. He's sticking up for the people to get their 4 months of unemployment insurance inside that bill, which I would say is pennies, as they give trillions to the richest 1,000 people who are now going to own the rest of the country. And so somebody tweeted that at him, at Dave Dayen, saying, your response to what Megan Day just said, that Bernie's just doing the best thing he could. Dave Dayen says, this is kabuki theater to please the rubes.
Yeah.
So now you're seeing stuff like this. He did it. Bernie just saved millions of people. And then you see Matt Stoller say Bernie stands cheered a $6 trillion corporate bailout. That's the cult of personality. The cult of personality is a hell of a drug. And then Jordan Cheriton, friend of the show, said, unless you think him blocking the entire bill indefinitely until corporate bailout was removed, thus resulting in no assistance to all the working people and possibly a Great Depression, was a good idea, this is the maximum result he could achieve. Now, Matt comes back and says, big decisions happen in moments of crisis. Wall Street wants to govern more than we do. That's why they are in power and we are on Twitter. Jordan says, I agree. I just think the bigger decision is immediately protecting tens of millions of working people from soup lines versus holding out to try and topple a Goliath that has grown over 40 years and won't be toppled by Bernie Sanders blocking a bill for 2 to 3 weeks. So Michael Tracy says, yeah, but that's not thanks to Bernie. You're misattributing credit. The attribution of credit is based on a false version of events. As Matthew Stoller has shown, if you're happy about the unemployment provision, thank Chuck Schumer and Michael Bennet. And finally, you say the situation was obvious on Saturday. They had time to organize. They knew what was happening. Bernie and Warren sold you out because they are cowards. Same with Josh Hawley on the right. Wow, that's strong language, Matthew. So tell me, how did Bernie Sanders sell us out? Didn't he do the right thing? As Jordan said, that if he didn't do this, then people wouldn't get the unemployment. What do you say to that?
Well, the whole thing is just annoying and stupid. Look, Dave Dayen and I and a bunch of others that saw this coming have either worked in the Senate. I worked in the Senate. Dave Dayen did reporting on the financial crisis. There's a whole bunch of others, Amanda Fisher and Graham Steele. These are people that know what they're doing. They understand banking law. They were there. All of the justifications that you see for why we had to pass this bill are exactly the justifications that they used to pass the bailout in 2008. It's total bullshit. But I'll start from the beginning, which was last week. Mitch McConnell cut out all of the Democrats and said, here, we need a big corporate bailout bill to address the pandemic. It was an obvious attempt to loot because the stock market was crashing. And at that moment, I wrote a piece on, I think it was on Saturday, saying this was a corporate coup because there's a whole bunch of dirty slush funds in there that we know about. The Fed is opening up its own slush funds. It's disgusting. But the point is we knew about it last week. And at that moment, if you want to do something about it, you organize. You get a few people together. You come out. You say, no, this is bad. Don't do this. And then you have a separate bargaining block. And you can threaten to take down a bill. And the debate becomes, should we bail out Wall Street in response to a pandemic, or should we rush immediate relief? And obviously what we need to do is rush immediate relief. But instead of doing that, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and all the other progressives and all the other populists on the right stayed quiet. And that's because Warren is arrogant and foolish, and Bernie is a coward and a loser. And they won't talk to each other because they both have giant egos, and they're not interested in actually wielding power. They also both want to be friends with Chuck Schumer. So they stayed quiet until, a couple of days ago, and let Schumer and Michael Bennet and a bunch of others negotiate the bill. Now, something people don't know about Bernie Sanders is that he's lazy and he doesn't actually deal with details. That's why when you actually push him on any details, he can't answer them. What he's really good at is talking to people about, why they don't have wages, and that's important. But honestly, if it wasn't a problem in 1985, he doesn't know how to handle it. Now, all the problems from 1985 are much worse today. So he sounds really good, but all the new things that come up, he can't actually talk about them. This was a new thing. This is a pandemic. He didn't organize. Warren didn't organize. The Progressive Caucus didn't organize. So they were presented with a fait accompli. All of the things in that bill were negotiated by Nancy Pelosi, her leaders, and Chuck Schumer. Bernie had nothing to do with it. He wasn't even in D.C. He never negotiates. It's just not the way that he works. Then at the very last moment, 3 Republicans come out and say, we think that there aren't enough mercenary-style hunting games of the poor in this bill. So we're going to put a hold on it. Even though for the last 5 days, Republicans have been saying that Democrats are not recognizing the urgency of the situations. And Democrats were giving no speeches and making no arguments at all about this bill, including Warren, including Bernie. All right. So here you have Republicans saying this is urgent. We have to bail out Wall Street. Democrats saying nothing. Chuck Schumer and Pelosi negotiating with McConnell. At the very last moment, these 3 Republicans say we need to be meaner to the poor. At that point, a bunch of Democrats are trying to figure out, should we vote for this bill or should we not? And Bernie then says, we have to vote for this bill. And I'm paraphrasing, but if these guys are going to hold up the bill, these guys are going to object to the bill, which means it'll be delayed, then I'm going to object to the bill on different grounds until they drop their objection. And if they drop their objection, then I'm going to drop my objection and I'm going to vote for it. So Their objection was based on the fact that you couldn't be mean enough to the poor. But the actual reason that you can't be mean enough to the poor is because the computer systems the government uses are so old and bad that it's actually hard to calculate, impossible to calculate on the time scale that you need how to send out the checks, except in very sort of except you give everyone $600, but it's hard to make sure that people that don't deserve it don't get it. So before Bernie gives this speech on the Senate floor, somebody asked Trump and Mnuchin at a press conference, what about this objection from Lindsey Graham and Scott and I think a couple of others? And Mnuchin gets up and says, no, we don't agree with this. And Trump gets up and says, no, we don't agree with this. And then a few hours later, McConnell cuts a deal with these Republicans and says, you get to put an amendment up, which everybody knows is going to fail. And that's the deal. You get to get amendments, so you get to vote symbolically against giving too much money to poor people, and then we're all going to vote for the bill. Now, in the debate, and I use sarcastic air quotes, Bernie gets up and says, what these small group of Republicans want to do is bad. What we want to do is give money to people who are unemployed. And there's a lot of Democrats and Republicans who want to do this. And he says that. He's like, there's a lot of Republicans that want to do this too. And so this is outrageous. It's a complete grandstanding thing for a provision he didn't author. The amendment was a fake fight. It was annoying. The whole discussion was irritating. It was reckless because he didn't bother to organize last week. Neither did Warren, neither did any progressives. The bill is a disaster. It is worse than TARP. Bernie doesn't even understand what's in it. The whole thing is a mess, and I'm embarrassed about the entire progressive space. I think it's shameful. I think it's disgusting that they work for Wall Street and don't even know it. I mean, I'm angry, but you got to understand, I worked in the House and the Senate on the bailouts for 6 years. I have traced housing finance problems. I know a lot about the Federal Reserve. This is not a bunch of rubes coming in and saying that, just being angry about this. These are people who understand congressional process, who understand banking law, who understand bailouts, who understand the Federal Reserve. These are law professors. These are people who think about the operational details of getting money to people who need it. And we're the ones who are angry. And a bunch of dumb, cultist, cosplay leftists are the ones who are building a cult of personality around Bernie, a fundamentally lazy and stupid politician, so that they can protect their moral vanity. It's embarrassing. It's annoying. Shame on them. It's time to grow up, all right, and learn to govern instead of trying to, promote your moral vanity and liberal fantasies.
So you're saying that even Trump and Mnuchin were signaling that what Lindsey Graham was doing by holding up the unemployment, that was not going to stand.
Yes.
Because if Trump and Mnuchin are against it, that doesn't have a fucking prayer of passing, right?
Yeah.
So Bernie didn't even have to give that speech.
No.
And so why did Bernie give that speech?
Because he's a liar. Because he wanted to grandstand and he wanted to tell his followers that he was standing up for them. And he wanted to take credit for something that he didn't do and justify a giant gift to Wall Street. It's embarrassing and it's wrong. The guys.
But why would Bernie Metz? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but why would Bernie then vote for it? It seems to be it would be in his interest. And by the way, Dylan Ratigan said the exact thing that you're saying. He said yesterday on this show, and he called out Warren also. And then I see Dave Dayen do the exact same thing. And then I say, you do it. And I'm like, oh, my God, these guys are the people who would know the most about this. And so what is in it for Bernie to go along with the machine? Is it just because he's always gone along with the machine in effect?
It is. It is. One of the things you'll notice about Bernie is he said, I led the fight against the war in Iraq. I led the fight against NAFTA. I led the fight against, opening us up to China. I led the fight against blah, 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 blah. Ever notice something about all those fights he led against? They're always losing fights, right? And there's a reason that they're always losing fights. He doesn't want to win. He's never wanted to win. He's a kitten, right? When it comes to actually challenging people in power. Like Warren.
I think, let me just interrupt. I think he wants to win, but I think he also is a kitten. and isn't willing to do what it takes to win, which is completely blow up and go scorched earth against the Democratic Party, the DNC. And, I mean, if it was Trump, he would have been calling out their cheating for the last 4 years, and Bernie didn't. He didn't even acknowledge that they rigged the 2016 primary, even though Don in Brazil said they did, and Elizabeth Warren said they did. Bernie wouldn't say they did. He wouldn't acknowledge the lawsuit. He wouldn't even... So I think he wants to win, but isn't willing at all to do what it takes to grab power or use the power he already has, right?
He's a liar. I mean, he is a liar, and it's a huge problem because
that seems strong.
No, I'm sorry, but like Joe Biden is corrupt. We all know he's corrupt. And when Zephyr Teachout wrote an op-ed about how Joe Biden is corrupt, Bernie Sanders disavowed it and said Joe Biden is not corrupt. That's lying. He knows that what Hunter was doing was wrong, but he said it because he likes Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders built a cult of personality around himself so that he could be friends with Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer. It is pathetic. It's just pathetic. And I'm sorry to be so stark and bracing about it. But, I have not said this stuff until recently because I didn't want, like, what Bernie was doing, I thought was important. But when someone like this actually, hands the country over to Wall Street, you have to speak out. And that's true for Warren, too. It's just wrong. And all of these people have multiple sides of themselves. They have conflicting pressures. And of course, Bernie, wants nice things to happen, and Warren wants nice things to happen. And a lot of politicians want nice things to happen. A lot of us want nice things to happen. But the question isn't whether you want nice things to happen. The question is, what are you willing to pay for that? And the reality is that if you're running on a political revolution and you're using your integrity as standing up to Wall Street against all odds and against the political establishment, and you talk about how you're against the political establishment, and the pressure is on, and you do no organizing, and then you talk about how you had to give in to Wall Street and the political establishment so that you can get unemployment through that would have gotten through anyway. Well, I'm sorry, but you're just a liar and a fraud. And I am tired of people assuming that a cult of personality around this guy is any different than the cult of personality that we built up around Obama. I'm sorry, but it's not okay. This vote was not okay. This is going to be a stain on everyone's record for the rest of their lives.
96. Why couldn't Bernie still vote against it? Why couldn't he go, this is still bullshit, I'm still going to vote against it. I won't put a hold on it, but I'm going to go down, just like with the Iraq war vote, I'm going to go down against it. Why would he be for this?
He wants to be friends with Chuck Schumer. I'm sorry, but that's just what it is. Like, at the end of the day, people don't see the conversations that happen internally. And one of the reasons, and look, I'm not, I thought Elizabeth Warren ran an embarrassing campaign. I thought her behavior was despicable. I think her behavior now is despicable. But I will say this. Warren fights for every inch internally. She is willing to make enemies. She's bureaucratically nasty. She is a knife fighter. Now, maybe that's going to change now because she's thoroughly embarrassed herself and changed her behavior. But Bernie has never been like that. He's always gotten along. He's always done whatever the political establishment wants, and he's put forward this brand that he's some guy that's shaken up the system. But like Tim Geithner chuckled at Bernie Sanders. He feared Elizabeth Warren, but he chuckled at Bernie Sanders, and everyone in power chuckles at Bernie Sanders, and this is why.
So I have said on this show that when Bernie turns to the camera and says Joe Biden is a decent guy and he can beat Donald Trump, that Bernie Sanders is lying, and he knows he's lying because Joe Biden is not. If you consider a warmonger a decent guy, a guy who's committed lots of horrible, if the guy who did the bill that made it harder for people who are in the most desperate bankruptcy situations, even harder on them. This is the guy who made sure that 5.1 million people got kicked out of their houses while the banks were made whole. He's the reason why people don't have health care, because when they had a filibuster-proof Senate and a White House, they gave us a right-wing health care plan anyway. This is why we're in this situation still. He's not a decent guy. He's as corrupt as they come, Joe Biden. He's why we got Trump. And And by the way, he's demented, and there isn't a chance in hell he's going to beat Trump. And Bernie Sanders knows that. And so I would say when he says that, he's actually lying. And why would he lie on behalf of Joe Biden? It's like he wouldn't. It's crazy. He was doing Joe Biden's campaigning for him because the only thing people cared about is he a decent guy and can he beat Donald Trump? And Bernie would come on and say yes. And so so that's over at that point, is it not, Matt?
Well, look, I mean, exactly. But also, if you think that Joe Biden is a decent guy, you have serious judgment issues.
I agree.
And I maybe that's possible too. But it's I'm sorry, but what Hunter Biden was doing is not okay.
Not okay.
And it's just not okay. That's just straight up profiteering. And then, obviously, I listened to that radio interview with that woman. Biden clearly sexually assaulted her.
Clearly.
This is a monster. He's a true monster.
A monster. He digitally penetrated someone who was in his employ and then shook his finger in her face and said, "You're nothing."
And I think it's just just so much of this. It's just been
and he's
I
demented.
To have kind of hope, right? Because
Matt, how long do you think they can go without saying he's demented?
Yeah, I mean, he's got the polite way to say it is cognitive issues, cognitive decline. There, so that's the that's the pronoun for this situation. I think he can't do the job. I mean, I don't know if he can beat Trump. I am not going to pretend like I can predict what voters are going to do, but I know that he can't do the job. He's just not. He doesn't have the mental stamina, and I think that I think it's a huge problem that Democrats picked him, and I really don't like the campaign that Warren ran or that Bernie ran. And I think that if it weren't for this coronavirus, I think Trump would probably, destroy him. And I thought Trump was a very weak candidate, but Joe Biden is just not. I mean, he's not fully there. I mean, it's really obvious. And it's just crazy that we've nominated someone like him. And that's on Bernie. He didn't run a campaign to win. He really didn't. It's also on Warren. She ran a bad campaign. She actually did run to win, but she has horrible political judgment and didn't listen to people who were telling her that, she should probably run on periodically murdering bankers instead of owning a golden retriever. But, whatever.
Jesus Christ, I know. So Matt, tell people what I talked to Dylan Radigan for about an hour yesterday, and he says the obvious solutions, of course, would be a UBI and Medicare for all. And what are your solutions?
Well, first of all, the government is so hollowed out that even if you wanted to do a lot of cash payments, we're going to see just how shitty our systems are. So just mailing checks is difficult for the government. So the simplest thing you can do is stop all fixed obligations for small businesses and individuals. So no rent, no mortgage, no utility payments, no water payments, those kinds of things, for a couple of months, and then try to get the cash out as quickly as possible. One channel that does work is that government can give money to cities really quickly. So I would get a bunch of money out to cities so that they can take care of their people and their businesses. And then you got to rapidly fix our bureaucracies so that they can do build a public health infrastructure, and however you choose to do that. But it's to the point, and then this is public and private. So we have to fix our supply chains too, so that we can make the masks and the various things that we need. So it's kind of like a crash course to rebuild competence in government at the same time as you pause fixed obligations, which is the fastest relief we can deliver. And then, all the cash payments, all that stuff is good, and all the,
so while we temporarily pause all obligations like rent and mortgage, so that would normally be bad for the banks, but we are making because of what happened in the last crisis, there is a tripwire now. And so we don't have to have a Congress have a debate over whether we should give $1 trillion to Wall Street and keep them liquid so we don't have a liquidity crisis. It just happens automatically now. So we can pause those rent payments. We can pause those mortgage payments, and it won't hurt Wall Street because the Fed and the government has already signaled that no matter what it takes, they will give to Wall Street to make them liquid, correct?
That's right. So the losses will pool up on, you don't pay your rent, your landlord takes a loss, and the landlord doesn't pay their mortgage. Stores don't pay their rent. It goes into, ultimately it ends up on the balance sheet of some bank. And so you got a bunch of banks that have losses. And we actually do have pretty good plumbing from the Fed to the banking system. So you can take care of it there. And then, you're right. We have these, we have a money cannon that's pointed at the financial system. So it should be fine. But that's how I take care of it. But I think the bigger problem that we have, because we'll get through this, right? But the bigger problem that we have is a political problem. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like, we have to drop the scales from our eyes, and we have to see what really is going on in our politics. And that is that I think you have two political parties that are not really that different. Mm-hmm. And you have factions in both parties that have populist instincts, but are not organized. And we have a whole public, like a lot of people in business and a lot of people in media and a lot of people in unions that are not organized coherently around a fair society. But there is anger out there. And I know there are people that are around Bernie and Warren and Sherrod Brown and Tammy Baldwin and Tom Cotton and and Trump who are angry about what just happened, but can't be public about it. There are a lot of insiders that know exactly what happened. There are people on Wall Street who are angry about what happened. They know how unfair this is. But it really is incumbent upon us to build out a movement of people and business people and people who work for a living and just demand to the political system that they act in our interest and not in the interests of Wall Street and financiers and the Chinese government. And I think we can do that. I don't think that's impossible, but I think we have to, particularly on the left, the right has its own issues, but I think on the left, we have to really reevaluate how we think about politics and recognize that there is intrinsic value to truth, right? Regardless of how politically unpalatable it is. Like figuring out what's really going on and telling the truth about it, even if it's really unpopular, is important. And we have to organize around that principle. And right now we're not. Right now we're organized around lying to protect the brands of various political leaders with cults of personality. And that's a recipe for corporatism or dictatorship. It's not a recipe for a fair society.
Well, if anything, the Trump presidency has proven the left does not value truth.
Correct.
Because the left has spent the last 4 years or 3.5 years opposing Trump on specious grounds and McCarthy smears. And if you want to talk about somebody who knows the value of truth, we've pushed back against the bullshit Russiagate narrative since day one here. And we've taken nothing but slings and arrows and been called every name by everybody, independent media and mainstream media alike. So I understand the value of truth here. The left is the people who don't. They think because Donald Trump is bad enough, they can become just as shitty as Sean Hannity. And that's what they did. And they're all despicable, from Rachel Maddow to Jake Tapper to the fucking New York Times to the Washington Post to 9/10 of the people on YouTube in independent media who consider themselves on the left. They're gross. They're horrible. They're just as bad as the people who are upset at Barack Obama for wearing a tan suit and saying that he didn't have a long-form birth certificate. The left became the exact mirror of that. And
Totally.
and so that's why now when we have a pandemic, instead of them screaming about real things like, hey, maybe we should get ready for a pandemic because Trump is right now disbanding the people who take care of that in our government. They didn't talk about that. They talked about Russiagate and a phone call to the Ukraine. And that shows the calcification of the political machinations of the left. They're just unable to respond to any. Right now, it shows right now, Matt, that they're completely unable to meet the moment, and we have to cling to a kabuki theater, a fucking show of Bernie Sanders pretending to stand up against the Wall Street and the corporation when he's actually not. That's all we have left. And now you know that at least half of the Bernie Sanders supporters will say we're attacking him, and so what they're actually doing is protecting this fucked up system that they think they're opposing.
Couldn't have said it better. I mean, that was amazing. And I would also add that, like, you know, one of my personal frustrations, because I pay attention to monopolies and supply chains, is that the left has no relationship to actual work. They don't actually do anything for a living. They don't make anything. Mm-hmm. They don't know anything. They think that food is grown in supermarkets, right? And so, like, when you actually look at supply chains, I wrote a piece in 2011 about how we have really serious supply chain fragility problems. And now all of a sudden people are like, oh my gosh, we can't make masks, we can't make ventilators, we can't make blah, 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 blah. It's like, where the fuck were you guys when Obama was negotiating really bad deals with China that Trump was talking about? Where were you guys when Trump created an opening to restructure our trading relationships? And now, you know, the only guy that's actually doing a good job is Peter Navarro, who is an economist who's in the Trump administration, who is attacking all of the neoliberals, and he's doing his best to restructure our trading arrangements. I mean, I don't agree with his politics, but he is doing that. And he actually knows that where you make things matters and how you make things matters. And all the left and the CNNs and the fucking Rachel Maddows of the world can do is make fun of people like that.
Yes.
Because they're stupid and they think that food is grown in supermarkets, because that is fundamentally who they are. And their audience is a group of old, annoying insurance adjusters who live in Des Moines. It's fucking embarrassing.
So when you say the left, you mean the elite, the left people. I'm sorry, say again.
Well, so there's a number of different factions on the left. You've got the like neoliberal centrist dipshits. You've got like the Rachel Maddow types, and like the CNN types and those people. And then you've got the kind of fake activist lefty types who are, you know, sort of read their Marx and then, you know, show for Bernie Sanders, like the Democratic Socialists, which is embarrassing too. And they're all basically factions whose really only divide is like age and race. They don't actually disagree about the underlying ideas. They just disagree about the aesthetics. And it's like, that's what's so irritating about this moment. And they all think that they disagree so much so that, like, you know, they get really into political strategy. Like, that's how they talk about anything, because, you know, oh, Bernie is too left, or, oh, Bernie is too, actually he's a centrist, and actually, you know, or Biden, all this garbage that doesn't mean anything. And the reason they use language that doesn't mean anything is because they don't know anything. And that's really the problem. Like, we are, as a political movement, the left, whatever you want to call it, the centrist, center left, the progressives, whatever, they are not serious people. They are not actually thinking about how people live their lives, about how our commercial relationships work, about how political liberty works, about how to put together a functional society, about how to deal with foreign power, about how to deal with a military, all the things that make up a society, how to deal with the family. They're not thinking about any of that. They're thinking about, how do I get a hit on Rachel Maddow, or how do I sell my stupid magazine, or how do I get another grant from this foundation to do my fake organizing, or whatever it is. It is a corrupt movement of frightened authoritarian children. And no matter, you know, whichever faction you focus on, it's all the same.
Well, as a country, I've said this many times that America collectively is a country of adult children of alcoholics. And we don't get mad at the people fucking us. We get mad at the people who point out who's fucking us. And so right now you're going to take a lot of heat for this, as is, I'm sure, Dave Dayen and Dylan Radigan and probably this show. But we're used to it. Look,
we're going to take a lot of heat, but at the end of the day, this is happening on the right too. I mean, Mike Cernovich is talking about how like the Republicans all sold out, how Mitch McConnell is terrible. He wants to get a Democrat to beat Mitch McConnell purely out of spite, which I respect. I like, I want all the Democrats gone. I mean, like,
me too.
Fuck them, right?
What do you think about organizations like the Justice Democrats?
Well, they're younger. I don't know what they did in this moment. I mean, some groups like the progressive, the PCCC, which is sort of a Warren affiliated group, they came out and said, come out against this bill, and Warren didn't. And then other groups, and I think like Indivisible was like, oh, we like the whatever bullshit, oversight that, Schumer negotiated. I don't know where Justice Democrats came out on it, but like, I think there's a basic problem with a lot of these groups, which is that they don't know anything. And they start from a position of ignorance, and then they think about the world in the context of how do you run better campaigns, not how do you build a better society. I think Justice Democrats a little better than most of them because they really are trying to learn. But they came out of a culture which doesn't value intrinsic truth, and it's hard as if you're in your 20s to really sort of kind of figure that out. You should have mentors teaching you, and they didn't. I mean, but I think I hope they figured it out. I think they are. But like that's what we have to do as people who care about a just society, is we have to use this as a teaching moment. And hopefully we're wrong. Hopefully this bill isn't that bad. I suspect it is that bad. And as it comes out how bad it is, we have to help educate people why they got it so wrong, and why we need to reorient our politics to move away from, worshiping political leaders and towards actually organizing ourselves and educating ourselves and building a real political movement that actually pushes politics instead of just kind of like worships various annoying brands.
So obviously the biggest problem, and what is at the root of all of this, is that our representatives work for the donor class, which owns both parties, which is why I keep referring to what's happening right now in American politics as professional wrestling. When Nancy Pelosi passes Donald Trump's complete legislative agenda and then stands up and rips up his speech to the State of the Union on camera, well, that's fucking wrestling. Because they're both doing the bidding of the guy. They just passed the guy's legislative agenda, and now they're signaling. This is all just signaling. This is all a show. It's just wrestling because they all work for the same people. And so that's really the big problem. And Nancy Pelosi is a criminal, and that's why she was able to make $100 million while she was in power. As Truman told us, the only people who get rich in government are crooks. So that's what's happening. They're all criminals. They're all manipulating the system to help themselves and their donor class. And there is no difference between the parties at all. And then people go, oh, Jimmy, there is. It's the difference between being punched with the right hand or punched with the left hand. They all just gave Trump $131 extra billion to do more war to a guy who they claim is a Manchurian candidate doing bombing at the behest of Putin. So those two things don't go together. What does that tell you? That tells you the Democrats know they're lying about Russiagate, but they can't actually oppose Donald Trump because they really support all his policies, especially his war policies.
I mean, yeah, they're just mad. A lot of Democrats are mad because Donald Trump doesn't use the right salad fork.
That's right.
That's what it is. I do think that it's more. It's actually worse than the Democrats are just working for their donor class, because I don't actually think Bernie is working for Wall Street, and I don't think Warren is working for Wall Street. I don't think they get money and then do these things. Right. I think that they did these things because they thought it was the right thing to do. And I think that, like, the Democratic Party, the Democratic voters picked Biden because they thought that Biden was somebody that they liked and respected and believed in his policies. And I think that they support Democrats up and down the chain supported Obama because they liked him and they thought he did good things.
Right.
And so I don't think I think if it were just like a money in politics problem, like it would be easier. But I actually think that we have tens of millions of people that have really craven, immoral ideas in their head and are incredibly confused. And I don't know what to do about that, to be perfectly honest. I think in a lot of ways, what these political leaders are doing is actually representing their voters and representing them well. I think Nancy Pelosi was doing essentially what Trump wanted because I think she was representing a Democratic caucus that wanted that. And then because they were representing voters that wanted that. Democratic voters don't like it when their political leaders fight for things. They really don't like it. I mean, I've seen this. Like they really don't. They get upset. They don't want the hassle.
I don't think Democratic voters wanted them to allow Trump to take money from the Defense Department and put it towards the border wall. I don't think they wanted to give Donald Trump an extra $31 billion extra dollars. None of these things are ever talked about. This is not, what they.
But it's not about what everybody wants. The world. Everybody wants nice things. The question is always, what are you willing to pay for those nice things? And I think Democratic voters, and I've seen it over and over and over. We never win primaries challenging incumbents. The only time that's ever happened that I've seen in a real way where there was kind of a long shot that won was AOC. And it was a low turnout primary. Every other time, the Democratic establishment wins. And it isn't because the Democratic establishment is corrupt. It is corrupt. It's because the voters believe they like their leaders. And even when you say, this leader did this leader did that, this leader did this other thing. So even when you actually tell voters, they don't care. They like their leaders. They don't care if Donald Trump gets the money for the wall. It doesn't matter to them. But they do care if Nancy Pelosi rips up his speech. They want the show.
I know.
And if you tell them that's the show, they get mad at you.
Yes,
right?
that's what I'm saying. That's my point. They're adult children of alcoholics. And if I tell them this is a show, they get mad at me. They don't get mad at the people putting on a show for them as they rape the country. They get mad at the person who points out that they're doing that. And that's where we're at. Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?